This episode of the Feed Podcast is brought to you by the Chicago French Market. The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
Have a beef with something you heard? Looking for a little extra side dish? Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at The Feed Podcast.
Once again, despite consolidation and a downturn in newsprint, it seems like cookbooks proliferate like potholes in Chicago.
They absolutely
Every year,
do.
this time of year in December, it's like how many cookbooks have come out in the last 12 months?
But it's the reason is because people love to read cookbooks. And I say read because I think there's a lot more reading going on than cooking from them. And it's like one of those great fantasy things. You get an opportunity to lie in your bed, and people will tell you that more people read cookbooks in bed than ever in the kitchen. And you're fantasizing about that meal you're going to make, that time you're going to have all your favorite people around your table. And I think it educates the public a lot, even if they're not necessarily always cooking all the recipes. They're getting educated, which for a chef, that just makes my life so much easier because the guests come in, they're not afraid of ingredients, they've read about them, they kind of know what's there.
Well, coming up on today's show, our third annual Cookbooks Show. I can't believe our podcast is 3 years old already. Just in time for any last-minute Christmas shopping, we're going to talk with a couple of authors we adore and respect, and then recommend a few others we think are worth your time and money. Stay with us. We know you've got family hanging around over the next week, so why not make them something delicious? This is The Feed Podcast. I'm Steve Dolinsky, a food and travel reporter at ABC 7 News, the Chicago Tribune, and Canada's Globe and Mail.
And I'm Rick Bayless, the chef and owner of Chicago's Frontera Grill, Topolobampo, Choco, Leña Brava, and host of public television's Mexico, One Plate at a Time.
And every week, The Feed takes a deep dive into the world of professional chefs, restaurateurs, food artisans, and drink experts, sharing their stories and uncovering their passion for food and drink. But that's not all. Rick and I are always traveling the globe for our jobs, eating, drinking, and immersing ourselves in the local culture. And if we find something exciting along the way, you can be sure it's going to find its way here to our James Beard Award-winning podcast. Over the past 2 years, we've had our special cookbook show where we've just brought in a boatload of books released over the past 12 months and shared some of our favorites. Today's show's a bit different in that we're going to spend the first two segments talking with the authors themselves to gain a deeper understanding of the methods and inspirations behind some of the recipes. In our first segment, we welcome Paul Kahan, the co-author of the new book, Cheers to the Publican, Repast and Present. Kahan is the co-founder of the One-Off Hospitality Group here in Chicago, overseeing such restaurants as Avec, Blackbird, Big Star, and of course, The Publican. And fun fact, he used to work for Rick Bayless.
Oh, but that was 100 years
100 years ago.
Before he became Paul Kahan.
Yes.
Before we actually tapped into the brilliance that's sitting here at the table.
Or did I become Paul Kahan when I worked for Rick Bayless?
No, I'm not taking
That's
any
the
credit
question.
for that.
I was going to say, welcome back to the torture chamber, Paul. You're back in the building.
I'm glad to be here.
So as I looked through this book, which is gorgeous, by the way, and made me want to cook immediately, I think everything I've ever eaten at the Publican is between these two covers. It's really, it's a deep dive into your history of this restaurant.
Yeah, it is. I mean, one of my favorite cookbooks that I was very, very much acquainted with early on, and again, I have to give Rick props when I'm in this building, was Rick's first cookbook, really because when I worked in the kitchen here, when there was a recipe, Rick would say, open up the cookbook, look at it, it's in the cookbook. And I would cook out of that book every day, every mole, most of the dishes that we did, most of the dishes we developed, that was our reference book, and the recipes worked. So, it took me 20 years to get the energy up to actually do a cookbook, and when I did it, I wanted it to be a comprehensive history of the restaurant. I wanted it to be more about why I think the food is so special at the Publican, more about the people.
Why did you choose Publican? That was my biggest question when I saw the title of the book and then started reading through it. Why is it not the Blackbird or the Avec cookbook?
That's kind of a long story, but I think in a nutshell, Blackbird, my first restaurant, took me to places that I didn't necessarily want to go. I think I was pushed there. We opened, I met my business partner, Donnie Medea. The design was, I wanted to call the restaurant the Little Blackbird, and I thought of checkered tablecloths and, Bernardaud china, and very quaint and very fine. And it turned out to be this modern restaurant, and the food had to suit the restaurant. So I started cooking a cleaner style that I wasn't really accustomed to. We still, I think people would say that the food back when I ran that kitchen every day was very soulful. I think it's still pretty soulful now. But, restaurant 1, restaurant 2, restaurant 3 is really the food that's most true to my heart. It's the food that I would cook at home. It's the food that I think is it's all very ingredient driven, but the Publican is really sort of the hallmark for our company. When we find a new ingredient, it sort of spreads from the Publican outward to Blackbird. I'll call up Ryan and say, "Hey Ryan, you got to try this fermented tuna stomach. It tastes like foie gras from the sea. It's incredible. Use it as an ingredient," and he'll get that product and use it. But for some reason, most of the time, not all the time, I don't want to not give kudos to all the other wonderful chef de cuisines in the company, but a lot of that inspiration comes from the Publican. And I think,
how would you describe Publican for somebody who hasn't been there? What does it look like? What's the menu like? And what does it taste like?
wow.
Well, when you opened, it was pork, beer, and oysters.
Yeah.
But
it's
changed.
not pork, beer, and
It's
it's
really
not
not-
just pork, beer, and oysters anymore.
It's really not. The inspiration for the restaurant was really sort of the emerging gastropub trend. My partners and I thought, we want to do a gastropub. We want to do a brewery. We want to do this. And myself and our architect, Thomas Schlescher, and his wife and my wife went to France and went to Belgium, and we ended up in beer halls. And I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And so we tried to create a modern American beer hall. And it was based on the soundbite oysters, pork, and beer. And I would run that by all my chef buddies at events around the country, and they'd say, "How could that be bad?" It sounded like a great idea. And it really started as oysters, pork, and beer. And I still have people say, I don't go to the Publican. My wife doesn't eat pork. And, hey, quietly, just order vegetables and seafood.
Right.
But it's
the last meal I had there, I think we only had vegetables and seafood, and it was spectacular.
Grilled cucumbers with zhug and
we like to pick oily fish, things that are not from the norm. It's sort of, the idea was to hark back to an old-fashioned way of cooking where you use the whole animal, where you use all these interesting cuts that people don't use anymore, where you use the lesser cuts and do interesting things with vegetables and fermentation and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's really turned into a sort of the sky's the limit. Blackbird in my mind is very focused, cuisine-wise, the same with Avec. The Publican is kind of take influence from wherever you want and make sure it's delicious and make sure we use absolutely incredible ingredients.
But you speak of incredible ingredients. So much of this book spends time talking about your farmers and your suppliers. Like, you couldn't have done things unless Dave Cleverdon from Kinnick Farm was growing things that you asked him to grow for you, and therefore they become part of your DNA.
Well, I think there are so many incredible restaurants in our city and so many great farmers in the Midwest and around the country. And for us, it was sort of a funny story is when I was talking to the Cookbook team, I was actually in my house up in the Northwoods, and it was 7 or 8 people on the other line. And what they were trying to tell me was, we don't want you to put your picture on the cover. And I told them the last thing that I ever would want to do is put my picture on the cover, and I hope my picture doesn't even end up in the book. And they pushed me to put it in, but really the idea was about, I wanted pictures of all the cooks in the kitchens. I wanted pictures of Greg Wade baking at Publican Quality Breads. I wanted pictures of where our product comes from and why I think that restaurant is so special. And it's really everything that's behind the scenes, behind me. I just help orchestrate what goes on there. So the idea for the book was, like I said, I just wanted to highlight people in action, farmers in action, really focus on, we actually went to most of the farms in the book and cooked meals for the people, and that was a little self-serving, but it was really enjoyable. And the photographs that came out, I think, are incredible as well.
Well, you have certainly defined Midwestern cuisine like no other chef, I think, in our area, by connecting with all the farms and by weaving all their stuff into your menus, all of your restaurants. And to me, it's been so cool to see. I mean, we started off trying to connect with farmers back when there weren't farmers.
I remember.
And you remember that. And then you took that to a whole different level, and it's just been so exciting and gratifying for me to see how you have defined Midwestern cooking like no other.
Well, it's
chef.
almost like, because you talk about Suzanne Goen, who's a friend and a colleague from California, and she, of course, has a bounty at her doorstep every day of the year, right?
So jealous.
But because of connections like her you have, and people in your life, and you ask questions to her, you say in the book, and she, you respond constantly, you're able to create this kind of environment for yourself in Chicago by having these farmers and suppliers who care as much about the product as you do now, right?
Yeah. In the beginning, part of the idea was I was obsessed with an incredible restaurant that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, 4th Street in Portland, Maine. Yeah. And his menu was a list of dishes followed by a list of farmers. So every dish or main ingredient was associated with a farmer. And we really took that cue from him and ran with it. So the menu is every dish, starting with items that are almost zero manipulation items. On the left side of the menu, we start with oysters. We go down through seafood and then to vegetables. And on the other side of the menu, we start with artisanal hams that we slice and serve with goat butter and bread that's baked in our bakery. And then we go to charcuterie and we go to more developed meat dishes, all sort of from smallest to largest. And every one of those dishes we associate a farm or a point of origin. And so that's really defined the restaurant. And it's really interesting. Every day, we have a schedule where different ingredients come from different areas around the country and locally. So we get Monterey Bay seafood direct from the suppliers or the fishermen 2 days or 3 days a week, and we get those things in, whether it be sand dabs or mackerel or you name it. We get fish from the wharf in Boston, and we sit down every day and we rework the menu. So there are 5 or 7 standards that all appear in the book that are always on our menu. The setups for those dishes often change with seasonal availability of seasonal ingredients. But then as a team, we sit down every day and we redevelop the menu. Sometimes 3 or 4 dishes will change. Sometimes 10 or 12 or 15 dishes will change. And it beats the team up. But it's also very inspirational, and it keeps that restaurant moving forward. So on any given day, you can go there 3 days in a row and eat a lot of different food.
But I'm putting my amateur hat on now. My brother or sister-in-law, the amateur cook, who doesn't get Monterey Bay, stuff flown in every day.
Sure.
What do they do? Are they going to make the chicken? Or are they going to do the ham chop and hay?
Give us a few
because there's some pretty advanced stuff in here for like charcuterie, but there's also not as advanced. So where would you steer that kind of a cook?
First and foremost, there's a message in the book, and the message is to cook with great ingredients and cook what's in season and do it with your heart. And the other message, and I was just telling a couple of the sous chefs at Publican today, don't take it that seriously. It's food. It's fun. Get behind that. Have fun with it. If it's not perfect, the next time you make it, it'll be better. But if you use great ingredients, it'll be great. And be flexible as well. If you can't get one ingredient, develop a repertoire of food in your mind and connect the dots like we do in the kitchen and substitute things, and they may work and they may not, but at the end of the day, it's still a lot of fun. So that message permeates the whole book. But to answer your question, something as easy as the publican chicken, which I love to tell people I think it's the greatest chicken that I've ever tasted. We worked so long and hard on it. Brian Houston, the original chef de cuisine, Erling Wubauer, who Rick knows very well, who's the original sous chef. We worked for weeks and weeks and weeks on that with different chickens from different farms and different ingredients, and we came up with something that we were so proud of. And we tell the story. We tasted all these chickens. At the end, it was just a squeeze of fresh lemon juice that really defined the dish and made it pop and added acidity. So if what you pick up from this is a great way to cook and marinate a chicken, a great way to pre-salt a chicken, a great way to finish chicken, I don't care what chicken it is, with the squeeze of lemon juice to really elevate the dish, if you just get that from the book, in my opinion, that's enough. And there are recipes that have sub-recipes that are very simple, things that become part of your pantry.
The aioli. You need
aioli.
aioli.
Aioli, zug, you name it, all kinds of stuff.
So what chicken do you use?
We use, because he's the only guy that can get us enough chickens, is Louis Schlegel. Because I think you take all the chickens from Greg Gunthrope.
He's gotten bigger now, so there's a few extras.
But he grows them the perfect size for us. They taste great. They're super fresh. We butterfly the chicken. And then we salt it the night before, and I think that's Judy Rogers' trick. Really changes the chicken texturally, makes the meat denser and juicier, and then we marinate the chicken that morning with a simple marinade of Espelette pepper, Mexican oregano. Wonder where I got that one from. Garlic, sometimes Fresno chilies if we have them, olive oil, lemon juice. I don't think I missed anything, but it's that simple.
Now, this show airs in late December, so right around Christmas time. You talked about, what's fresh, what's local, what's seasonal. Now, California right now, different story than in the Midwest.
Yep.
Is there something here you'd recommend, like besides a pie I'm looking at a picture of, that would be good from the vegetable section in the wintertime when someone has a bit more of a challenge? I know you've got grilled cucumbers.
Yeah, I mean, my mind goes right to that dish. The grilled cucumbers, they're inherently in your mind, it's a summer thing, but hothouse cucumbers are great. I mean, we can't. There was a restaurant, I'm not going to say the name, that opened in Chicago once, and they tried to be seasonal, to a fault. And the restaurant failed because people don't want to eat brown food in the winter. They want lettuce and they want bright flavors. And, in my opinion, you have to do that. It's you can get anything from anywhere, and I think we try to do that with a conscience.
But now we also have a number of big greenhouses that are growing for us, from the Mighty Vine tomatoes that are excellent to
Gotham
all
greens.
of the Gotham greens. Yeah. And so we do have something that we didn't have 20 years ago. We got a lot of local sources too for some of that fresh stuff that we absolutely have to have.
Yep. Agreed. There's a famous recipe in the book, well, if there's such a thing, but a grilled carrot recipe, that's a barbecued carrot recipe that people go bonkers over, and that's a spring, summer, winter, fall recipe.
Right.
So there's a lot in there that spans the seasons.
You also talk about bakery, too. So I mentioned charcuterie briefly. If someone's really advanced or really wants to try their hand at making sausages, they can do that.
Yep.
There's also, as you mentioned, Greg Wade from Publican Quality Bread. So Publican Quality meats, Publican Quality Bread get folded into this. It's not just the Publican restaurant.
Yeah, that was another reason the Publican seemed like the right vehicle for my cooking. We started as a over-ambitious restaurant with too small of a kitchen. We expanded to a butcher shop across the street because we were obsessed with pickling, canning, whole animal butchery, charcuterie, and we needed a space to do that in. And so we ended up there. And of course, over-ambitious again, we opened up a little bakery in the basement there and quickly realized that was a real bad idea, and moved around the corner and opened up a full-scale bakery. We supply I think almost 50 restaurants in the city with our bread right now.
The best bread in town.
It really is amazing bread.
Greg's a wonderful baker, super talented.
Yeah. Well, when people come to Chicago, I always say you've got to go to either Avec or Publican because it's soulful cooking, it's hearty, it speaks of where we are in the Midwest. And you say it's funny to hear you talk about the chefs you admire and respect. Jonathan Waxman and Suzanne Goen and all these great chefs from around the country, and you all sort of have the same philosophy. Just cooking with whatever you can locally, seasonally, sometimes organic, but not always. But just really cooking from a sense of place.
Correct.
Right?
And we're happy about that.
You know what? I've been friends with all the people you mentioned for a long time, and with good reason. I worship what they do, and most importantly, they're really, really wonderful people. They're fun to hang out with. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But I think we help to inspire each other. I mean, for me, Jonathan Waxman's chicken is really special, and when you ask him and when you watch how he does it, it's salt, pepper, and he sort of recirculates the fat that he cooks the chicken with over and over. Mm-hmm. Last time I did an event with him, he actually puts it in a squeeze bottle and squeezes chicken fat all over the dish, all over the chicken as he's cooking it on the grill. And he lets it rest. Sometimes he cooks it halfway and lets it rest and then cooks it again. I think it depends on his mood that day. But at the end of the day, it's really, really delicious chicken, and it's based on the bird, and it's based on just doing things right.
Your chicken's great too.
Yeah,
Paul Kahn, thanks for coming in today, and congrats on the book.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
All right, we're going to take a short break, but coming up, I sit down with Top Chef judge and now cookbook author Gail Simmons about her new book. Then later, Rick and I pick a few more cookbooks we think are worth the money. Stay with us.
Looking for a little extra side dish? Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @TheFeedPodcast.
Commuters have known this for some time, but over in the West Loop at the Ogilvy Transportation Center, there are more than 30 specialty vendors just waiting to feed you inside the Chicago French Market.
The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
My name is Ashley. I work for a company called Vanille Patisserie. We're a French-inspired bakery, and we specialize in macaroons and entremets, which are French mousse desserts. And if I had to recommend one thing to try, it would be the Royal right here, which is a beautiful chocolate dessert. It has crisp caramel streusel on the bottom, chocolate mousse, hazelnut in the center, and then dark chocolate glaze all at the top.
Have you seen the lines, by the way, over at the Aloha Poke over there? And there's like the Aloha Poke, there's a line, and then there's Fumare Meats, and then there's, well, as you just heard the vendor, I mean, there's so much going on right now in that market. There's quite a lot to eat.
That's very exciting. I got to go over there and have some poke.
They've got two entrances, 131 North Clinton and 118 North Canal. And how about this? Covered parking is free for an hour with a $20 purchase.
Wow, that's great. They're open Monday to Saturday. You can also grab a bite and surf the internet since Wi-Fi is free. The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
You're listening to the Feed Podcast. New episodes drop every Thursday morning.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. We're talking about some of our favorite cookbooks this year, and one book that I didn't really know if I would like before I got it was from Top Chef judge and TV personality Gail Simmons. I've known Gail for many years, back when she worked at Food & Wine magazine, and I didn't really know her full story. She worked in the kitchen for Jean-Georges at Vong in New York, as well as Le Cirque. She also was Jeffrey Steingarten's assistant at Vogue, helping him write his food columns. Her new book, Bringing It Home, is a distillation of her travel experience and time spent in the kitchen, not just as a pro, but as a mom. I caught up with Gail at a dinner she was hosting at Monteverde recently in Chicago's West Loop. Gail Simmons, welcome to Chicago. Great to see you.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Steve. I love this town.
All right, so I want to talk to you about the beginning of the book. You talk about, a lot of times you get questions like, do you cook? And people only know you from seeing you on television. And sure enough, your bio speaks volumes about what you've done. You went to culinary school, you worked for Danielle Boulou, you stayed in the kitchen for Jean-Georges. And so tell me about, you got a culinary career that happened before you got to Food & Wine and Top Chef.
Yes. It's funny. Most people think I started my food career on Top Chef. Well, I couldn't have gotten the job if I didn't know anything about food, right? But I think people now take for granted. They don't think, how did she get that job? I did write a book about it. My first book was Talking with My Mouth Full, which sort of explored the idea of how popular culture and food sort of are at this amazing crossroads in our history. And I happened to be along for the ride and lands in some pretty special jobs because of it. But it's true. I started my job, my career in cooking. It was always about food. It wasn't about television. I never dreamed of being on television, actually.
Right. Somebody at home told you if you want to be in this world, you just got to go to culinary school. And you went to, was it Peter Kump?
I did. I went to Peter Kump, which is now called ICE. This was a long time ago, Steve.
Not that long ago.
Well, I mean, 18 years ago now, 19 years ago. And I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be in the world of food. I thought I wanted to write about food. So I went to culinary. I worked for a year when I graduated college in Toronto, where I'm from, working for a magazine, the City Magazine, Toronto Life, and then working for a national newspaper. And in both places, I just found myself drawn to the food editor and realized this is my beat. I can't avoid it. It's calling me. So I asked the food editor, well, how do I get a job being a real food writer? And that's what he said. He said, actually, you don't know anything about food. So your first step is to learn how to cook so that you can actually speak the language of the kitchen. And I took his words really seriously. I quit my job, moved to New York, and went to culinary school. From culinary school, I went to work in kitchens as a line cook, still with always the intention to get out and write. But I knew that I needed to get up my skills so that people would take me seriously and so that I would have a voice that I could speak with from authority. I can't believe I even had the courage. It's almost arrogant to think of the restaurants I chose at the time. I first went to Le Cirque 2000, which at the time was in its heyday. It was a 4-star restaurant at the Palace Hotel, and every major CEO and celebrity and major chef and anyone who was anyone in New York City went to Le Cirque. And from there, I went to Vong restaurant, which isn't open anymore, but there was one in Chicago.
Yeah, briefly.
Vong in Chicago and a Vong in New York. Jean-Georges Vong Richton's really groundbreaking at the time Thai upscale restaurant. The first restaurant that really blended French classic technique with Thai and Southeast Asian flavors.
The kitchen work set you up for working for Jeffrey Steingarten at Vogue for a couple of years, which could not have been easy because I've done Top Chef. I've done Iron Chef with him before. Yes. That was not easy.
No.
But he sent you all over New York, into little stores and ethnic joints, and you had to pick up peppers and chilies and spices. And so, again, you sort of adding to your layer of experience.
The great thing about working for Jeffrey is he is a real stickler for research. And he would always say to me, if you do the research, the story writes itself. And of course, he's right. He taught me so much in the 2 years I worked for him. And I was running all over town looking for ingredients or equipment for him. I spent a lot of time in his kitchen developing recipes with him. I wrote his second book with him and did all of the research, which, by the way, back then was in the library.
Right. No Google.
Yes, with the Dewey Decimal System. Still wanted to write, but Danielle Ballou offered me a job, and when Danielle Ballou offers you a job, you take the job, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I went to work for him for almost 3 years, but I was working in PR and marketing, which is a totally different side of the business, which was great because it kind of was like my MBA in restaurant management. From there, I met the team at Food and Wine, and in 2004, I went to work at Food and Wine magazine.
And then you get this job working Top Chef. And the thing I'm interested about, the reason, by the way, the book again is called Bringing It Home, Favorite Recipes from a Life of Adventurous Eating. And you have had this life of adventurous eating because even before the Top Chef experience, you're talking in this book about, well, first of all, there's a lot of Canadian references in here, right? You're talking about Toronto and Montreal. You went to school in McGill, so Montreal. You're talking about living on a kibbutz in Israel. You're talking about going with your in-laws to Spain, going to Massachusetts in the summers with your husband. So you've got all these different experiences around the country and around the globe. You couldn't have written this book until just now.
Absolutely not. And it took me this long to actually even have the confidence to write a cookbook, to put my recipes all together. I never thought that anyone would really care or listen to them. There is so much noise in the cookbook space, and I kind of always thought, well, who am I? Why does anyone care? But it was only just 2 years ago when I finally felt like I had a collection of recipes that was different than others and that had my specific point of view and perspective gathered from 40 years of obviously eating and cooking and traveling the world. I've been very lucky. I did a lot of travel as a kid. My father's from South Africa, my mother's from Montreal, and they loved to travel and always were led by their palates. I mean, we did tons of food exploration as kids. And then I traveled a lot in college. I lived in Spain for a year. I traveled to New Zealand, and I spent a summer in the Middle East. And then when I got to Top Chef, interestingly, because I'm Canadian, I spent a lot of time traveling overseas, but I actually hadn't explored America very much. I'd been to New York, I'd been to California, I'd been to Florida. That might literally have been it for my American travel, more or less. I'd never been to Chicago until I came on Top Chef.
Shame.
No, it's embarrassing. Well, now I come all the time, thank God, because now it's like really one of my favorite places. But
You talk about New Orleans in the book.
yes,
You spent time
exactly. Well, and Top Chef has taken me all over the country and the world. But what's amazing about it is that we don't just sit down in a country or a city, let's say New Orleans, Chicago, Charleston, for 3 days. We go for 2 months. So we really get to know the place. And I've had so much great eating experience in each city, and I've really been inspired by that.
I'm always amazed by your memories. You have memories of something you had like 5-10 years ago, and now you decide I'm going to tweak it. Like, I think you're on your honeymoon in Vietnam, and you go to this place in Hanoi you heard about. There's a line is crazy. You can't get in. You go back. You can't get in. You just decide I'm going to figure out how to make this recipe myself back at home, and you tinker.
I tinker. I do a lot of tinkering. That's the Jeffrey Steingarten coming out in me. But also, that particular recipe was a recipe for a very classic Vietnamese fish dish called chaka lavong. And it was a place that I was very sad to not be able to get to on my honeymoon. Everyone, from Anthony Bourdain to, my mom's best friend, told me I had to go to this one restaurant. And of course, being the sort of obsessive, compulsive person that I am, I tried, and when I was denied, I kind of fell apart about it because it wasn't knocked off the list. You know what I mean, Steve?
I've done that. I did it in Hong Kong. I actually cried.
I cried. I mean, it's embarrassing now. I have learned my lesson. My husband thought I was a lunatic. But I realized, well, I understand I never got to eat it firsthand there. But luckily, actually, the dish is so famous that it's on most Vietnamese restaurant menus in some form or another. And it's a very specific dish. It uses a lot of turmeric and fresh herbs and peanuts and rice noodles, and it's generally the fish they use in Vietnam is a snakehead fish, but because you can't get that here, catfish or a simple white light fish is perfect for it. And so I just set out to do it at home because I was determined to experience those flavors and understand the dish a little more. And of course I tweaked it a little bit. I decided to make it into more of a salad, and I made it really spicy, and I added lots of fresh mint and pineapple and roasted peanuts, and it's one of my favorite dishes in the book.
You love chilies and herbs, I can tell in this.
Yes.
I also love the fact that you really tap into your Jewish heritage, so you and I are copacetic on this.
I can't help myself.
You couldn't, of course. You're Bobby Snazzy, is that right?
Yeah, Grandma Snazzy.
Grandma Snazzy.
Sholem.
Awful Sholem. And you make her, you tweak a little bit with the matzo ball soup. You do a Sunday sort of a spread with bagels and all kinds of different cream cheeses.
And smoked, and I cure salmon.
I'm glad you mentioned that because as we speak, the beet-cured salmon is sitting in my refrigerator. It's a 3-day process.
Yes.
Let's talk about curing salmon. I'm glad you brought that up.
So honored, Steve. That means a lot to me.
I bought this side of salmon, the best I could, the wild salmon at the store. It's equal parts sugar and salt, and then it was a bunch of dill I chopped up, some lemon zest, and the beets you could put in the food processor, you said. I didn't want to get mine all dirty, so I just grated it on the grater.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so then I put that on.
Pack it all in, all over the salmon, and then you weight it down. So you can use a sheet pan or a heavy dish on top. I sometimes weight it down with some canned beans from my cupboard. Weight it down, let it sit in the fridge for 3 days, and I hope it comes out as successfully it should. We tested this recipe many times, and my favorite part about it, obviously, it tastes beautiful. It has that little bit of dill and just a nuance of that citrus from the zest.
And I toasted coriander and white pepper, too, and I ground those myself in a mortar and pestle.
Yes.
So it's going to be good.
Jeffrey Steingarten would be proud. He's all for a mortar and pestle. But the best thing also about it is when you present it, it has this gorgeous ombre color because the beet sinks in and gets really soaked up by the salmon, and it's just a gorgeous dish. It's very impressive.
Now, I could be wrong, but when I looked at the picture in the book, the bagels looked like St. Viator bagels. They looked like Montreal bagels.
Good eyes, Steve Dolinsky.
No way!
They're not St. Viator, but they're close. I am very much a staunch believer in the Montreal bagel.
As am I.
I am obsessed with Montreal bagels. I love New York and all, and they make a fine bagel, but it's more just like a big round ball of bread. And I eat them every weekend in New York City. But a Montreal bagel is something very special. And I couldn't get them for the book. I could not ship the bagels for my book shoot. But there is a company in New York that is owned and operated by a great chef who is from Montreal, and it's called Black Seed Bagel, and they make sort of a hybrid.
Noah.
And Noah Burmanoff is so amazing. He makes his own version of a Montreal bagel. It's not exact, but it's pretty close. And so when I did this shoot, I called Noah and said, I have to have your bagels because I don't want a big New York bagel. I need to be true to my heritage.
Good. Last question, because I'm going way over time here, but I love talking to you. So the cover, you have this picture. It's a spaghetti pie inspired by your trip when you were, I think, backpacking at 19 in New Zealand.
Yes.
And you had some crazy sort of carb sandwiches. But it's interesting that you chose this for the cover. I get this sense from this book, you want people who don't want to spend a ton of time. You've got a little daughter at home. So why this dish? Is this just a really comfort dish? It's a good leftover dish? It's just something that friends and family can get around and get together?
It's all of the above. I didn't mean to have spaghetti pie on the cover. I didn't plan it that way. The spaghetti pie recipe in my dish sort of became my hero dish in the book, unknowingly. There's always dishes you think are going to be the best dish, but we made the spaghetti pie, and it took a little while to figure out exactly how to make it the way I wanted it, and we kept making it, and it just got better and better, and it first of all, it weighs 15 pounds.
Yeah, it looks like it.
It feeds a small army. I mean, it can easily feed 12 people. Or you make it for your family of 4 and you put it in the fridge and it literally makes the best leftovers of all time. It is not hard. This is not major thinking food. And I thought that it was just so sort of out of the ordinary that when we shot the cover, decided that I needed one next to me. It gives me comfort, even if it's just hanging around.
I loved just reading through the recipes. You obviously have this obsession, like a lot of us do, for eating and for travel and discovering things. And like I said, I've only made one recipe out of the book so far. I'm going to eat it in 2 days, probably. I'll let you know how it is. But definitely, if you like to eat, like to cook, Bringing It Home. Favorite recipes from a life of adventurous eating by Gail Simmons. Gail, great to see you, and thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Steve. It's such a pleasure to talk to you always.
For the record, the beet-cured salmon that I made from that book was outstanding. I had 4 guys over 2 days after that interview. And just like she said, it had this beautiful color on the top.
Stunning.
So easy to make.
Right.
It took me 5 minutes to put everything together, put it on the salmon, and 2-3 days later it's done.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Done and beautiful.
Really, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. All right, coming up, Rick and I talk about a few other recommended cookbooks, then we wrap things up. Plus, we're going to preview some scenes from next week's show, so stay with us.
to the Feed Podcast. To get your weekly fix, subscribe to us on iTunes or visit our website, thefeedpodcast.com.
Commuters have known this for some time, but over in the West Loop at the Ogilvy Transportation Center, there are more than 30 specialty vendors just waiting to feed you inside the Chicago French Market.
The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
My name is Josh Weisel. I'm the general manager here at BB's Kosher Deli. We're the only certified kosher deli in downtown Chicago. I'm the mashgiach here, a certified Jew on premises at all times when we're cooking, and that's how we have our certification. We have a pretty big following of non-kosher clients as well who come down here just because they like the pastrami and they know our sandwiches are the best around.
Have you seen the lines, by the way, over at the Aloha Poke over there? And there's like the Aloha Poke, there's a line, and then there's Fumare Meats, and then there's, well, as you just heard the vendor, I mean, there's so much going on right now in that market. There's quite a lot to eat.
That's very exciting. I got to go over there and have some poke.
They've got two entrances, 131 North Clinton and 118 North Canal. And how about this? Covered parking is free for an hour with a $20 purchase.
Wow, that's great. They're open Monday to Saturday. You can also grab a bite and surf the internet since Wi-Fi is free. The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
You're listening to the Feed Podcast. To get your weekly fix of the feed, subscribe to our podcast at itunes.com.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. We're talking about cookbooks on this week's show. Earlier in the show, we talked to Paul Kahn about his book, The Publican. We talked to Gail Simmons about Bringing It Home. Now, Rick and I wanted to talk about a couple of books that caught our eye. As we said, there are dozens that come out every year. I'm going to start with one here called My Rice Bowl. I'm going to give them a little bit of shit because in the beginning they talk about, this is from Rachel Yang, chef and owner of a couple of restaurants out in Seattle and Portland, Revel in Seattle, Revelry in Portland. And of course, I always gravitate toward anything Korean. I loved Revel. I'd been there several years ago. I want to give them a hard time because they talk about when she met her future husband who went to Champaign-Urbana, University of Illinois. They spelled Champagne like the region in France. Really, folks? You have a copy editor in New York who knows how to spell Champaign,
No,
Illinois?
all champagnes are equal. No, we can't say that.
No, I know.
No.
But anyway, the thing that I liked about this book was that it's not like hewing exactly to the letter of Korean cuisine, like some of the Korean books we've talked about in the past. They take liberties. And they also have kids. They make dumplings. They show you how to make the dumplings a little bit. They've got two little kids. So it's not like chefy. We're worried about getting it exactly right, just like my mom made it when growing up in Seoul. So I kind of like that. You could make like a riff on the seafood pancake that we always talk about, but with some pork belly instead of all the seafood that you might normally see. There is a kimchi, and there's a couple of kimchis in here, which you can make in a week, if you just let it sit for a couple of days with Napa cabbage. It's going to take one visit to the Asian grocery store to get the gochujang and the gochugaru and some of the chili and probably the fermented fish or the
And they all
fermented
come
shrimp.
in large containers. So
That's the problem.
when you
I
you have to
know.
be ready for that. I have a sort of separate pantry in my basement where I put stuff like that so that when I decide I'm going to do the Korean stuff, luckily most of that stuff will keep for quite a while. So that's what I did. But yes, you can find it at any Korean market.
So this is called My Rice Bowl, and that's the book that I'd recommend first.
Okay, so all of mine are very oriented toward professional chefs. I'm just going to start off with that. There are a lot of books out there that are not, but this year we have such incredible stuff. So the first one that I want to talk about is called Offal Good from Chris Cosentino. He spent years working on this. He is well known for his restaurant in Kanto, which doesn't exist anymore in San Francisco. He has moved around and opened a lot of different restaurants, but he is the person that most chefs will turn to as having the inside scoop on any kind of offal, any kind of innard. I love the tagline on the name of this book. So it's Offal Good, Cooking from the Heart with Guts. And it's really remarkable. So if anyone has been interested in tackling any of those innards, this is the book to go to because he will tell you everything that you need to be successful.
All right. Well, again, I probably wouldn't do that, but there are professionals out there who want to cook with offal.
Right.
I'm going to go back a little bit Asian, but I'm going to shift regions now. Instead of the Pacific Northwest, we're going to go to Austin. a place called Elizabeth Street Cafe, where I actually had sort of a breakfast lunch a couple months ago with Matthew Odom, who's the critic at the paper down there. He recommended it. And I should point out, by the way, this publisher, Phaidon, they produce a lot of nice books.
They do, and beautiful books.
Beautiful books. So Elizabeth Street Cafe has a book out. Again, nice pictures, but the fact that I can make a vegetarian pho, I wouldn't have to necessarily go get the beef bones and boil them for 15 hours. You can make a riff on that. Just like the other book I was talking about, they take liberties with some of these things, drunken noodles with chicken you can make, rice sticks with steak and crab. Not terribly difficult. Again, just probably one trip to the Asian grocery store. And they do have all these great color photos so you can kind of see if you're doing it right. And, and you're looking through the pastry part of it, and there's chocolate croissant, and there's, I'm not going to make cannelé because I don't have a cannelé form or the mold, but I could certainly make some of these croissant. Probably I can make banh mi if I wanted to, but really nice if you want to do some baking or you want to do some savory, and they do breakfast, lunch, dinner, and sweets. Elizabeth Street Cafe.
Okay, my next one is American Seafood, Heritage, Culture, and Cookery from Sea to Shining Sea by Barton Seaver. This is a book that anyone that cooks seafood, anyone that is a seafood fanatic, whether you're professional or not, you should have this on your shelves because it goes alphabetically through all of the American seafood. This guy spent pretty much his whole life working on this thing. He was a chef for Jose Andres in D.C., and then he was actually, while he was doing that, he was named Chef of the Year by Esquire. He went to the sustainability side and worked for Blue Ocean Institute, and now is the director of sustainable seafood at Harvard Center for Health and Global Environment. But this guy is so brilliant. All of the information that he has amassed is all of the information that you would ever need to be a good seafood cook. And there's tons of recipes, but there's also the background information. And I'm so excited about this book. It's one of the best books that's come out in the United States in years.
Super cool. Wow. Okay, that looks great. It's a big book, too.
It's a big book, yes.
Okay. My last one is The Palestinian Table by Reem Kassis. This is, again, a Phaidon book. Bourdain likes this book. I want to just show Rick, I want to show you this picture and this one of these center spreads. I mean, doesn't it look good? It's dips. It's little snacks, almost like a burek. There's all these like avocado labneh and preserved lemon spread, or the walnut and garlic labneh. And I like this book just for the spreads and salads. I'm not necessarily going to go get a whole lamb necessarily, but I love the rice dishes from this part of the world, and I love the spreads, and I can get pita from anywhere. I don't have to make the pita myself. Right. I have za'atar always in my pantry to sprinkle on top of pita.
Right.
But if I could just have this for a party, if I wanted to do really good cocktails and like some of these dips and spreads, that would be worth getting this book, The Palestinian Table.
Well, you might, if you like that kind of food, you might want to get the new Ottolenghi book called Sweets.
Okay.
And I haven't cooked out of it yet, but I've had a lot of fun in my bed, paging through and looking at all the beautiful pictures.
You read cookbooks in bed too.
I read cookbooks in bed too. Anyway, that's not my last one. I got a tie for my last one. Peppers of the Americas by Maricel Presilla. Again, this is one of the great food writers of our country. She wrote the book that swept all the awards a few years ago called Gran Cocina Latina, and she has now come out with this huge book about peppers. So any chef or any home cook that really wants to understand all different kinds of peppers, whether you call them chiles or ajis or whatever, it's all very carefully documented by a PhD historian. She really knows her stuff. So I'm going to say that one is tied with a book called Mezcal, The History, Craft, and Cocktails of the World's Ultimate Artisanal Spirit by Emma Jansen. It's a really beautiful book that is very thoughtfully done. There are a lot of books about mezcal that have come to my attention over the last couple of years, but this one I think is the most thoughtful. A whole lot of interviews with the mezcaleros, and I think that's a really cool thing.
Do they recommend specific mezcals?
Yeah. I mean, she went out into the field and she interviewed all of them. And now we're very lucky in this country that so many of them have come in. And 20 years ago, we had nothing. 23 years ago, Del Maguey mezcal was the first really serious artisan mezcal that was brought into the U.S., but it's only been within the last 5 to 7 years that we've really seen the explosion in mezcal in the U.S.
Like how many do you have at Lenya Brava?
167 now.
Wow.
167 expressions. And that's not all. Those are just the ones that we think are the best.
That's insane. All right, good book to get.
Yeah.
Okay. Coming up next week, a deep dive into the world of bread.
5 volumes later and having to cut 600 recipes because they didn't fit into the book. It seemed like unending how many things we could add to it, but we had to find a middle point.
We'll talk with the co-author and chef behind Modernist Bread, Francisco Migoya, about what he discovered over the course of putting together a 5-book series that retails for more than $500. That's next week on the show.
You can always contact us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Feed Podcast. Check out our ingredient challenges and get recipes and other information about previous shows by simply visiting our website, thefeedpodcast.com. And please subscribe and rate our show on iTunes. Be sure to follow me at Rick_Bayless.
And I'm at Steve Dolinsky. We're in the Apple Podcast section, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, pretty much everywhere. More information about the books we talked about on our website as well. Linnea Dominic's our intern. Max Dolinsky supervised today's music. Bureaucratic wrote and performed our theme song. And the Feed Podcast is edited by Matt Cunningham at Truthful Enthusiasm. Whether you're an individual or institution, get your story online with truthfulenthusiasm.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.